We're looking today at the theme, God Makes the Difference. And we've got three people now very active in different sort of areas of science and science communication. And we're going to be digging into how God makes the difference for a Christian in this world. So I am delighted to, it's so good to be here. Look out, I see faces of young, awesome scientists who I'm in awe of and excited about where their careers are going. Looking forward to hearing from Emma later on. We've got Zach and Anka, who I love. And also a lot of old wise heads that I feel so junior compared to and learning a lot from. And we've got a good mix here. So we have here to my left, we have Davinder Gardner. Now, some of you will have met our three guests at previous conferences, which is terrific. Davinder is Principal Clinical Scientist at Royal Wolverhampton Hospital NHS Trust. And you might know Davinder from the Faith Experiment as well. Look forward to hearing about that. At the end here we have Nelly-helen Ebruka, who is the Africa Region Coordinator at Space Generation Advisory Council. Me and Nelly might be the only two nerds who are in the space sector in any way, but do feel free to ask her all about that. And she's doing a PhD in politics and Africa-EU relations. So lots we can dig into there. And we have Reverend Dr. Mike Kirby here, who has, congratulations, just been elected president of the British Institute of Radiology. So well done. Let's give them all a clap, not just Mike. So first of all, we'll start with you, Davinder, and we'll work our way across. Tell us more about what you do and how God makes the difference in the way that that works out as a person of faith.
Okay, so I work, as you mentioned, as a principal clinical scientist. I work in... Oh.
Well, it's made a little boom noise there. No.
Hold on. Put down my tea. Thank you.
Oh.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Good. I work in radiotherapy, which is a form of cancer treatment. And as you can imagine, it can be a hard-going job. I work to design individual treatment plans for patients who are receiving radiotherapy, because every patient is different. They all need slightly different things. And I also help to service the machines, make sure the machines are delivering radiation where they should be and the amount they should be. I got into the field after becoming a Christian, actually became a Christian in my 20s. I was partway through a degree in physics. I was very keen on physics, thought I was going to be working for NASA actually, but then I think when I became a Christian, for me, the conversation I was having with God was, well, actually, I really want to help people, so how do I do this? And then it turned out there was a profession called clinical scientist, particularly in radiotherapy, which involves radiation and physics. And I thought, well, this works. This allows me to provide that call of loving service in the way that God wants me to, and use the things that I've learned, use the science that I've learned to help just improve people's lives and hopefully help them live longer, healthier lives. So that's a summary. I'll allow someone else to speak for a bit.
Okay, sure. Mike, tell us about what you do on both fronts, Reverend Dr. Mike Kirby.
Well, this is an interesting segue because I started in exactly the same way. I'm also a radiotherapy physicist, but much further down the path, really. So I was born and raised in a Roman Catholic family, and exactly the same thing. My mum was ill for her entire life, and that was one of the things that drove me to try to use my physics that I went to university to do. I went to Durham to do a first degree in physics. In fact, I sat next to David Wilkinson during quantum mechanics classes, which he understood, and I pretended to do so. I was spent most of the time singing in the choir in the chapel or on the river rowing. But I did then use my physics through a master's and a PhD at Manchester to then set up at the Christie in Manchester. And that was my, and still is my profession. So I did exactly the same thing as you did, and then became a consultant clinical scientist, then a head of service, at the Christie, but also at Royal Preston Hospital, and did lots of things strategically in setting up new cancer centres. But at the heart of all of that was my calling from God, and I still see it as a calling from God to do what we do in science, really, whatever that science might be. So now I've done a lot more in a national environment, really. I've been on various IPEM committees, BIR, etc., which takes me to conferences to show my research. Now I'm working in a university environment with lots of students, principally through Liverpool University. And as you very graciously said, I'm about to become the president of the British Institute of Radiology. I've worked there. And probably the same way you find, both of you really, in terms of going out to conferences to talk about my research or take my students' research. I have the added benefit that I go in a dog collar. And you go into environments where you don't expect to see a priest. And that generates lots of different conversations. But at the heart of this, of making the difference, is that I feel I'm called still, even through my ordained ministry, to still be an active scientist and to do that work for the love of others, for the good of others.
Thank you.
It's very nice to be here. I'm the only person that doesn't know anything about physics on the panel, so pardon me. But I really loved space and astronomy growing up, but since I wasn't very good at physics, like I've said, I ended up studying law, so I'm actually a lawyer, and I got called to the Nigerian bar. However, I focused a lot on space law, international space law, where we look at space governance and treaties and that kind of area of how we coordinate activities in outer space. And that was how I started my career in the space industry. And then I switched more to international relations, where I did my master's, and now politics. So my field really is the social science of space, studying space from a very political perspective. However, this is just my academic profile. Outside of academics, I've been very much involved in social responsibility outreach projects like space education, for children, for young people in universities, so just telling them more about space. Now, how my faith makes a difference is in this whole mix is, I grew up a Christian, I grew up in a very religious home as well, and my parents were very lovely people of faith, and that really gave me a drive that whatever I'm doing, it has to be for the glory of God. And that kept my inspiration going. So when I started social impact projects and volunteering from a very young age in universities, I was doing this as my contribution to society and my contribution to the fact that God wants justice. So both my parents were teachers, and I was very familiar with how the public school system works, and knowing that a lot of these children did not really have access to know about maybe astronomy properly or to be taught space and science education properly. So when I carried out those projects, it was my way of saying everybody should have these opportunities. The thing about studying space or working in the space industry but not being in sciences is that you are seeing all the things that the scientists may not be paying attention to, the social issues, inequities, the fact that post-colonialism, corruption, and governance and institutions have a direct impact on who benefits from science and who doesn't benefit from science. So it's my responsibility, I believe it's my responsibility to contribute either academically or even in project and the work I do to spread this good news of how science can help the world by inspiring young children as well. So that's just why. Thank you.
If I can just stay with you for a moment. John Reynolds and I were having a little chat just during the break that space law, people involved in space law are probably going to do pretty well over the next decade or so. And then you throw in the international relations. There's a great little book that people connected with the Mars Society absolutely despise that came out this year called A City on Mars, about all the different kinds of problems that we're going to face going into that. And space law was a big one that came up. Working in that kind of place, the intersection of the sciences and the humanities, how does being a Christian directly work for you there? What difference does it make for you going into that? Because I imagine it can't always be easy.
Absolutely. These are very difficult conversations to have. Due to the nature of my research, I generally have a very critical approaches to any sort of human activity that would tend to replicate the injustice we see on Earth. So, for example, there's a whole body of literature that looks at maybe we want to go to outer space, but what do we want to do there? What are the systems? What are the laws? What are the treaties in place to govern how we work there to make sure that we don't just go or run with the same institutions that have really made life on Earth so difficult? For example, sustainability. Sustainability is such a big topic now in space. We see people launching multiple satellites and how that could harm dark and quiet skies. So where Christian worldview, I think, is very important when it comes to space exploration is, again, like I said, justice. How are we doing wrong on Earth that we don't want to see being replicated in outer space? Hypercapitalism is a problem, obviously. And how do we come up with principles that would lead to equitable distribution of space resources, or that would make sure that the benefits of space is for everyone and space doesn't just turn to something very elitist for just a few number of people. So that is where a Christian worldview becomes very important in maybe researching or working in the industry.
Thank you very much. Mike, going from the research side and now working in a university setting, do people treat you differently? What opportunities come out of the fact that you now have a dog collar?
Well, they don't necessarily treat me differently, really. Interestingly enough, when I was looking towards ordained ministry, I got just as much support to become ordained from my non-Christian friends as I did from my Christian friends. I was working at the Christie at the time, and there were a lot of people who I used as reference who were non-Christian, who their first response was, well, it's about time, Mike, isn't it, that you did that? And you went towards that. And they were hugely supportive, really. So, but it's interesting. So it was only after I trained for the church in Cambridge at Westcott House and came back just before my ordination that I started working in the university environment, really. So, and it's wonderful being there to be able to teach in a dog collar. And I have to say, when people ask, well, when do you use your dog collar, when do you not? It really does come down to a practical level. It depends which shirt is ironed at the time. It's not, yeah, I might be going on to do other things as well, really, but it is a practical thing as much as anything else. But there have been some wonderful conversations. Obviously, you're working on that intersect whereby I'm not a minister employed in the university, so I'm not in the chaplaincy and so on. So I'm not there to teach about faith. I'm there to teach physics and radiotherapy physics and calculations and all the rest of those things. But you can still have those conversations afterwards, really. And I often use this one example that quite quickly after I was ordained, I was teaching the last teaching session for one of my third-year classes. We've just done a series on talking about advanced technologies, the sort of things that we're used to in radiotherapy physics. And the class kindly clapped. I turned around, wiped the board, and turned back to the class, and half of them are still sitting there. And they asked, Mike, for 3 years, we don't know how you can be a physicist and a priest. And we then had a wonderful hour outside of the schedule to talk about that, to talk about some of the conflicts that have been put forward, but how you can actually hold the two together without, for me, any particular difficulty at all. So there hasn't been any pushback from having a dog collar, same way in terms of working on a national basis, being in national committees, etc. But it opens up wonderful conversations, many of which you feel a person wanted to ask for that. Some have asked me for prayers openly in the middle of a conference, which I gladly would do. But you often then think, well, would they have actually asked that if I wasn't there, or they didn't know that a Christian was there? And suddenly, even if that's just for one person, it opens up something that is very, very precious. And we praise God for that.
Now, I want to ask both you and Davinder this, because radiology, cancer treatment, a place of fear, a place of suffering. We talk often about being light in dark places. How has that worked out for each of you? And how do you feel? How do you find that as a Christian?
Yeah. So I guess it's worth mentioning that I'm part of a bigger team. So I am one piece of the puzzle that might help, provide the answer to what happens with the patient next or how they might go through treatment. So just to give a bit of an example, quite recently we introduced a new treatment technique for our hospital. That is for a type of gynecological cancer, cervical cancer, and it is a development on a treatment called brachytherapy, where you have to deliver the radioactive source to the location of the cancer. Now, you can imagine how invasive that is. So I'm not with the patient, but I'm there planning their treatment using images like CTs. So I'm very much in the background, working with images, kind of at a standoff with the patient. But because this was a new treatment, I stayed the longer day and I went down to see the patient before their treatment because I felt that was important and, it helped tie the whole thing together. And obviously you've got someone who is having this or is about to have an incredibly invasive treatment. Bless her, she wasn't feeling particularly happy about it, quite scared, lying down. And it was just that thing of being able to say, you've just done brilliantly. I've just been there in the background trying to sort your treatment out, and it's been a slow process and you've had to sit all day like this, waiting for this treatment to happen. I didn't say that to her, but that was what was going through my mind. And I just said to her, you've just done brilliantly. I'm just here to check some stuff, and I just want you to know that you have done so well, and, this will be a couple of treatments and then, just go and do what you need to. So that was how we introduced that technique anyway, and we were able to say, actually, we've done this novel technique. It involved a lot of work, it involved a lot of battles. When you say bringing the light into a dark place, I'm working for the NHS in 2025. So I'm trying to think of something that's a bit lighter, but I think essentially it's looking around the environment, seeing what you've got to work with, and bringing something that will ensure that patient gets the holistic care that they need, and just playing your part within that. There's a good model for it in Christian, in the Bible, where it says that everyone brings their gifts and comes together. And I guess that is true of a multidisciplinary team delivering a treatment. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, something to add?
Yes, only by having been in the profession longer, really, a number of decades longer, really. So you then end up working much more at a strategic level in terms of how we deliver these sort of services, how we bring them in. But it was mentioned this morning, really, the ethics of these things. And some of the things, sometimes we can get caught up with the technology, where we both work in all three of us, technology-driven, really, in terms of imaging, in terms of scans, in terms of now the use of artificial intelligence, both for diagnosis and also in what's coming into what we call adaptive radiotherapy, adapting the treatment whilst the patient is lying there on the couch. But actually trying to think about, just because we have technology, do we use it? Should we use it? Part of that comes from, in the earlier days, the first development of what we call a multi-leaf collimator, really, which is now absolutely standard practice across the NHS, across all of our equipment. And it was a way of shaping the radiation beam so it's much more closely to the shape of the tumor, the target volume itself. It was so obvious that we should use this that we brought that technology in. In some countries, it was brought in and then paid for, particularly with IMRT, before we actually knew, well, is it actually doing the thing that it should do, really? Is it bringing benefit? And some of the recursive researchers showed that actually some patients would do just as well without that, really. So I think that's brought us into a much more careful place of thinking about the technology, trying to get the research. You've always got this chicken and egg situation. When you've got the new technology, do we use it? But we can only get the evidence to say that we can use it by using it. So you've got this circular argument in a way. But it does bring that to the fore, and certainly our Christian credentials help us to think about that, especially for challenging treatments. Very much within the NHS, we look forwards, really, trying to think about the way that patients can live well with their disease, whether it's cancer or other diseases, etc. But my Christian faith has always been the grounding for, are we using things in the right way? Are we doing the things the way that our faith says that God calls us to do, including our gifts and talents and our skills as much as anything else? But we need much more of that to kind of look at the new technology, the AI aspects as well within that, and keep a really good ethical faith worldview boundary for that, really, in the future.
Excellent. Davinder, I first came across you through the faith experiment.
Yeah.
So you've got some quite rich experience in science communication from a faith's point of view. I just wondered if you could give us any examples or any explanation of how your experience as a science communicator and a Christian has sort of worked out or helped you in your current setting.
So, the first thing I need to tell everyone is I'm not a natural evangelist. I am the kind of person, and this has literally happened, I've worked in a bakery and I struggle to give out free bread samples because I then struggle to sell the bread. So, talking to people about faith is not something I am made to do in the sense of going in and going, do you know Jesus? That is just something that is very anathemic to my personality. But what it has helped with is, and what I've learned over time is the art of listening. And this is as much not to so much patients. Again, I don't see a lot of patients, but particularly my co-workers who are often working in that setting. A lot of the time, what I would say is I'm not a talker, I'm definitely a listener. So just listening to where they're at, asking questions. The thing I will do is I'll be open and say I am a Christian and I believe that Jesus died for us and rose from the dead, which, can get a mixed response, in a room of scientists or various people. But it does stoke curiosity. So I think working in that world of science and faith and having that knowledge has helped essentially for me to be equipped in those conversations. I was talking with someone I met earlier and who I've met before, Perry's at the back there, and I met Perry at a cosmic cabaret where he told a story, and it impacted me a lot, and it made me think that actually communication can take many forms. And I took the thing of actually, stories are important, we're hardwired to take in stories. And so that's become part of my communication style as well. I would, there's another confession I need to make. I'm making all the confessions today, which was that when I became a Christian, and then when I got into the field that I was in, I very much put my faith and the science in two separate boxes. And it was actually, the faith experiment came out of meeting Matt, who is my husband now, and when we met wasn't a Christian at the time, and was very much like, so what about this? What about this? What about this? And I'm like, So the faith experiment, which is essentially a series of sessions about looking at how science and the Christian faith can come together, came out of Matt grilling me and me not knowing the answer. So yeah, that's how we got to where we are.
So, well, before we go to your questions, I'm going to come to each of you. I'll start with you, Nelly. How does, as concisely as you could, as if you had a non-Christian asking you here, in the example you've just given, Davinder, how does God make the difference? We talk about being a scientist who's a Christian or a Christian scientist, or however you want to phrase it. What is that? What is the difference between a Christian scientist and a scientist who's not? How does God make the difference?
That's a very hard question.
Sorry for coming to you first for that.
Okay, I think I'll just keep it simple. I think for me, how God makes a difference in what I do, as opposed to what other maybe people that do the same thing that I do are doing, is the bigger picture of just glorifying Christ and being a worthy example of the faith. Because it's very important, especially like secularism, like he said, going to a conference and then having to pray for somebody and meet a need that another scientist that probably has the same credentials would not be able to make. That is when God actually makes the difference. And I know the God of the gaps is a very derogatory statement to use, because I was going to use the word the gap. So that is where God actually makes the difference, when our lives as scientists have more to offer than just science and cold facts. So we have hope. We have something to say about resurrection. The issue of suffering, for example, you've talked about suffering, is very prominent in the literature that I study sometimes. When you study maybe injustice, power, relations between countries, sometimes you have to read things about slavery, and these things are not very pleasant, especially if you have a background or maybe someone that has faced racism or something. Now, being a Christian in those spaces and being a scientist, you're able to be a worthy example of someone else that might have had the same experience, and being able to tell them about salvation and being able to tell them about God. It becomes your way of worship and service, because there are many ways to serve, like he says. So you have something, one, to offer to other people in that field, and number two, you might have a perspective that other scientists may not see. You would bring in the social ethic and the moral imperative of the discussion that other scientists may think, okay, this is not important. But because you have something really rooted in your faith in Christ, you're able to bring that, okay, what about how would this affect other people? Like you talked about, should we use this technology or not? So there is something really special, that we bring. So, that's what I'll say.
Excellent. Mike?
How do you follow that, really?
Yeah.
That's beautifully done, beautifully said. God has made a difference throughout my entire life, really. And I think that's one of the main things I would say, that God has been there through a whole series of ups and downs, particularly that we see in science, particularly that we see in medicine in our patients, really. But God gives us the hope. God gives me the hope. God gives me that thing to hold on to of Jesus Christ through all of those difficulties. I felt that when I was a part-time hospital chaplain as well at Chester, and just being alongside people with their own difficulties and challenges, you were able to actually talk to them about some of the science of the things that they're going to experience, really, but also be there for whatever was meaningful and of value for them within it. So it's been the heart of it. I still say that it's the calling that I have to do this, to be an active scientist, and also to be a priest as well. But the hope that's there that underlines everything, really, so is the foundation for that, is the most important thing for me.
I guess what I'd add to that is that in our field of science, I work with a group of amazing scientists, and we all, whether we're of faith or none, we accept that this is a messy science. This isn't, we've got evidence that shows that certain treatments work for certain things. But then you have a human in front of you, a messy human with a messy life, wanting to do, with perhaps certain things you need to bear in mind. You don't have a clean answer for what's best for that person. That answer requires conversations between people like doctors, radiographers, nurses, people, all those people who are involved in that patient's care, and myself as a scientist. Now, if you're not of faith, you just accept that. This is just life, this is what we do. But for me, as a Christian, God completes the picture of why that's necessary. Because we are beings that are deserving of dignity, that we are made in God's image. And so this approach absolutely, holistically, just makes sense in a way that I just wouldn't even think about if I weren't a Christian.
Excellent, very well said. Can we give a round of applause to our guests? Thank you. Three wonderful guests doing amazing work as Christians in the world that they're in. We've got a couple of minutes for questions and comments, if anyone has some, and we have a roving mic, which will be delivered to the front. Thank you, Steph. So hands up if you've got a question or a comment. Zach over here.
more about what you do with the faith experiment. What is it? What kind of audiences are you speaking to? How is it developed? What would you like to do with it?
Yeah, so with the faith experiment, hold on. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. It was a series of 7 sessions that just sort of evolved. And it's pitched at both Christians and non-Christians alike, particularly perhaps Christians who might be a bit more skeptical about science and those who might think that science is a barrier to holding a Christian, faith. So it answers questions like, those basic ones like can science and faith come together? Can a Christian believe in evolution? What does science say about the soul? Can God break science? Can God perform miracles? How different are we from animals and that sort of thing? And we do that in a family-friendly, interactive way. So we deliver those sessions where we're asked to. We like to bring in games, lots of hands-on things for people to perhaps build scientific knowledge where it isn't there, because we want this to be pitched to people who don't necessarily know all the scientific concepts. And then from there, we talk a bit more about, well, actually, can we bridge this gap? So it's assuming perhaps the conflict model's there, but it's just sort of talking through those more basic concepts. And we do it from the view of where we are. We're both healthcare scientists, so we both work with patients, images, patients all going along a particular treatment pathway. So we deliver those sort of talks from that perspective. So evolution, for example, perfect example is the evolution of the COVID virus. We bring that example in and go, well, we were sort of seeing the vaccine and the virus evolve, and then we had to kind of figure out what to do with that and that sort of thing.
Great. Next question, Helen.
Thanks. Question for all three of you, really. You've all spoken about being witnesses to people who aren't Christians in your fields, but I'm wondering whether you see yourselves as role models for other scientists who are Christians but maybe don't have that same confidence to kind of express that in the workplace. Have you had people come up and say, actually, you've given me the confidence to do that? How do you see yourselves in that role?
That's a great question. It'll be great to hear all 3 answers. Very much so, again, talking about that conference environment and at national and international conferences, it gives people the confidence to come and approach and actually share part of their Christian journey. I've heard about things from my colleagues that I've not known before about their faith within that, really. So, and you hope just that little bit of seed that's allowed them to have the confidence to do that, might then do that in their own environment or within their own hospital or faith context itself, yeah. But I've experienced that very much so, really. And perhaps because, I have the advantage as well as the disadvantage of going in a dog collar for that. But it does generate that, really.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, absolutely for me. So in my sphere and my work ecosystem or community, a lot of people are Christians because largely, like for the Black African community, we still have a lot of people identifying as Christians. But it is one thing to be a Christian and not like people don't know or say anything about it, because the space sector, again, a lot of physicists, very secular and everything. So for me is, I've always had, like maybe on my Instagram bio, I would put like a scripture or show that I'm a Christian. And in personal conversations, I'll say, oh, sorry, I have to go to church. I'm very emphatic. I can't attend this meeting because I have to go to church. And over time, I noticed that some of them that were Christians, they became very free to talk to me about, oh, I'm going for this church program. And it became something very lovely where we share testimonies. We even have like a small group now for space and faith. For some of us within SGSC, for example, where we just share scriptures, and it's really encouraging. If somebody gets a scholarship, of course, we are able to congratulate them and be like, oh, we thank the Lord for that. It really gives you this kind of space to be comfortable and to be free and open about your faith. When I'm in a work environment for the first time, I always, first things first is to let people know I'm Christian. So maybe I have like a signature of the cross or something. some people might call it, there's something they're calling it on social media now, and it's called piety signaling or something, trying to say you don't have to tell everybody that you're Christian or anything. But I really disagree with that sometimes, because you don't know who is struggling to speak out, who is going through something. So I've been very vocal about my faith within my work community, and that has helped and encouraged other people that work with me to be free and talk to me as well, and things like, oh, pray for me, I'm going through this. And yeah, I think it's really beautiful just being able to identify as a professional and as a Christian. I think for me, nobody's going to beat me for whatever, like, and I can just, because most like people that are not Christians are very bold and very raw about the things they believe. So I was like, why can't I be that way as long as I'm not being arrogant about it? So that has really helped me and helped other people as well.
I wouldn't say I'm a good role model at all, actually. But I guess I am me. And so it is just that thing of learning, that was kind of my journey, learning to kind of bring more of myself in. I think for good reasons, you know, I am quite guarded, and other people will feel that way as well. So it's not natural to kind of say, oh, this is a part of myself. But that is the place I think that we have to go to be able to have authentic conversations. And yeah, so when it comes to talking to Christians and non-Christians alike, I guess all I can do is, just say to them, this is me. Who are you? sort of type thing. But if they want to share that, then yeah. And I would hope, certainly, like my prayer every day is that God gets glorified in the course of that. So, you know, I am always looking to improve how I talk to Christians and non-Christians alike. And that's, but yeah, it's still a journey.
Can we show our appreciation for our three guests?